Hey, it's Adam, your internet chess coach. In today's video, we're going to analyze a game number one of the World Championship match between Anatoly Karpov and Gata Kamsky in the year 1996. Before jumping into the first game, let's take a look at some background information. At the time, Garry Kasparov had no interest in rejoining FIDE at the time. FIDE was separated from the World Championship title, and the World Chess Body continued with its normal qualification cycle to produce an opponent for its champion, which was Karpov. An American Grandmaster, a 21-year-old at the time, Gata Kamsky, emerged the winner of the process. Kamsky was born in 1974 in Siberia and moved to United States in 1989. He was a genuine chess prodigy, winning the under-20 Soviet championship at the age of 12 years old. In July 1990, he became the youngest player ever to appear on FIDE's top 10 rating list. He obtained the Grandmaster title at the age of 16, and Kamsky was single-mindedly pursuing his goal to become world champion of chess, participating in the PCA and FIDE qualification cycles. He reached the finals of the 1994 to 1995 PCA candidates matches, eliminating Vladimir Kramnik and Nigel Short before losing to Anand. The FIDE candidates matches brought even greater success for him, defeating von der Steren, Anand, and then Salov to emerge as Karpov's challenger. Just going to skip ahead here. The prize fund was $2 million, with approximately $1 million going to the winner. 500,000 to the loser, and the rest split between FIDE and the various charities. The match was scheduled for 20 games, and if tied, the match would continue until the player won a 2-game mini match. The game began on June 6, 1996. Let's take a look at the first game. So in round number one, Karpov had the white pieces, and he started out with pawn to d4. Kamsky replied with knight f6, pawn c4, pawn g6, knight c3, d5, knight f3, bishop g7, and queen b3. This is the Grunfeld defense and the Russian system of the Grunfeld. Pawn takes on c4, queen takes, black castles, white gets a strong center, and black plays knight to c6. While white has a strong center, he lacks some development in king safety. In the meantime, black is going to try to play moves like c5 and e5, maybe even a6, b5, and try to take advantage of the fact that the white king is not in the center. Karpov played bishop to e2, bishop to g4, bishop to e3. In this position, black has the threat of taking the knight, and after the bishop takes back, the pawn in the center will fall. So this is why Karpov plays bishop to e3. Bishop takes anyways, white takes back, and now Karpov plays e5, challenging white's strong pawn in the center, just in time before white castles. If he played a softer or quieter move like rook to e8, for example, you can now play the move pawn to e5, opening up the bishop, preventing black from playing e5, and getting an enormous advantage here. Quite a nice advantage. This is why he played e5 immediately, and after pawn d5, knight to d4, bishop to d1, pawn to b5, Kamsky's still trying to prevent Karpov from castling. After knight takes b5, we have knight takes e4, and the idea of knight takes b5 is quite common and quite nice. Black is trying to lure the white knight away from the b5 square in order to take the pawn on e4. After knight takes e4, white finally gets the chance to castle. Now in this position, Kamsky played a6, which is a mistake. a6, although gets off this diagonal and makes the pawn a little bit safer, also attacks the knight. At the same time, the pawn on a6 can become weak, and Kamsky had some better alternatives. Instead of pawn to a6, he could have gone knight to d6 and tried to establish a pawn structure where the pawn on c7 wouldn't be a long-term weakness. But okay, a6 was played. We get the knight coming back to c3, knight coming to d6, and queen moving to safety to d3. The queen goes to h4, putting some pressure on the king side. Karpov plays pawn g3, and after queen h3, bishop takes, pawn takes, and knight to e2. The knight is headed to the f4 square, headed to kick away the black queen, and at the same time, maybe install the knight on the d3 square, blockading this pawn. In addition to that, the c file looks awesome for a white rook potentially landing there. We get queen f5, knight to f4, rook to b8, queen takes f5, knight takes f5, and knight d3. Bishop to h6, controlling the c1 square, and rook to e1. Another alternative white could have played here is bishop to a4, trying to go into the light squares, preventing the pawn from ever moving, and also kind of trying to stop the rooks from getting active. Rook to e1 played by Karpov, pawn to a5, and bishop to g4. And what I really like about the way Karpov plays is he's able to take a direct focus on creating potential weaknesses in the position, threatening to take and create a weakness, and also he's able to target weaknesses systematically. Let's see how he achieved this. The knight goes to d6. The rook cannot go to c1 right now because the bishop covers it, so he plays rook to e2. Another alternative besides rook to e2 was rook to e7, but this did allow, after rook a7, the king to get in the game, or even bishop g5, kicking away the rook. So Karpov takes a quieter approach, but still extremely strong, headed to c2. After pawn to a4, we get pawn to a3, rook to a5. Kamsky's targeting the pawn on f3. After rook to c2, rook takes on d5, rook takes on c7. Karpov has traded his d5 pawn for the c7 pawn, but with the light squared bishop still on the board, Karpov's going to be able to potentially utilize the d5 square for his bishop, or at least create the potential threats of getting the bishop to d5. After rook to a5, bishop comes to f3, the bishop goes to g5, and the rook goes to d1. At the time of analyzing this game, I was also thinking rook to d7 could be played. But although it attacks the knight immediately, it didn't have as big of an effect in the game. And for example, after knight to c4, the pawn gets hit, rook to e1 now, and we're getting lots of counterplay with knight takes, or bishop f6 first, defending the pawn. Okay, after rook to d1, rook to c8 was played, rook takes, knight takes, and h4. Bishop to f6, rook to c1, very natural move, taking the open file, knight d6, and king to f1. Before Karpov starts to invade with the rook, he brings his king in to the center, which is a very typical idea, but commonly misplayed or not timed properly. With the queens off the board here, the king is perfectly safe to come to the center and should be activated. King to f1, bishop to e7, king to e2, king to f8, and rook invades to c7. After bishop f6, king moves to d2, pawn to h5, and the king goes back to e2. And here Kamsky made an error with the move knight to f5. Okay, try to think about why this is an error. Pause the video if you want and try to find the best idea and sequence for white. Okay, welcome back. The knight on d6 had a critical role, covering the c4 square, and as soon as knight moves away from d6, Karpov takes advantage of this by targeting the weakness on a4 and threatens moves like bishop c6 and knight c5. And what you'll notice about the way Karpov plays from here and in general as a very strong player is as soon as he notices a weakness, he'll systematically try to target the weakness, fix it if he can, and win the weakness, at the same time stopping any counterplay. The move looks kind of obvious at this point, but I can assure you that at the time of the game, it's not so clear how white can find all the best moves. Okay, knight e6, rook to b4, rook to a6, and knight to c5. Rook to a7. And now my question again for you is, do you take the pawn with the knight? Do you take the rook, or do you play something else? Try to pause the video here and see if you can guess what Karpov played. All right, welcome back. Karpov didn't take the pawn with any of his pieces. He first played the move king d3. Using the king as a blockader and making sure that you don't have any counterplay whatsoever with pawn d3 and taking on b2, potentially. So Karpov goes king d3, rook to c7, now we take the pawn, rook to c1, and knight to b4. Bishop g7. The task now is going to be very clear. White has two connected pawns on the queen side, and it's going to try to nurse them to victory. Pawn to a4, rook to a1, knight gives a check, and the knight goes to c5. Karpov improves the activation of his rook with this knight maneuver, and the knight keeps guard of the a4 pawn. King to e7, we have king to c2, rook to f1, and knight to d3. Re-establishing the knight as a blockader, defending f2, defending b2. And this was an unbelievably masterful show of technique by Karpov. Rook to a1, king to b3, pawn to f5, rook to b6, bishop to h6, and bishop d5. Pawn to g5 was played. Black is desperate for some counterplay and is trying to make his bishop on h6 useful. Karpov ignores the pawn on g5. You could potentially take as well, which was fine, but he decides to go rook to a6 and help the pawn to promote. Kamsky captures on h4, pawn captures back, and we have rook d1. The bishop comes to c4, offering the knight to trade. If you take, the king will take back, and then the b pawn will roll down the board. As well, the bishop on h6 is going to fall. We have rook to h1, pawn to a5, rook to h4. And here we have, I think, an absolutely amazing move, which sealed the victory for Karpov. Pause the video and try to find it. Okay, the move Karpov played here was bishop d5, taking away any opportunities for the black rook to get behind the pawn and come back in defense. After bishop d5, the game didn't last too long. After rook to h3, the game was actually over after bishop d5. And rook to h3, just a sample line here. You can play king c2 getting out of the pin, and there's going to be no way to stop the pawn. Rook to h4, for example, and rook to a7, king to f6, and the pawn continues to march. So this concludes game 1 of Karpov versus Kamsky. The score is 1-0 Karpov, 0 Kamsky. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.